看起来不错。
王老师你好，
好，
我是
嗨
Rachel。
，Rachel，
Hello，
你
慧
好。
玲。
嗨，你好。
Hello，你们好，很久不见你们了。
是啊，是啊。
过来看一下那个课有什么问题。顺便想谢谢王老师啊，今天是最后一堂课是不
对
是？
对对，
哦，
是，
谢谢你哦，谢谢你一直支持我们。
哎，不客气。
那之后如果你还有什么很有趣的话题，随时都可以欢迎来我们这边跟大家
这样
聊聊天。
，OK，谢谢。
嗯，好啊好哦。
也因为做这个实在很累，我觉得还是出去玩
嗯。
比较好。
好啊，好啊，
真的很
趁现在
辛苦啊。
天气
是啊。
好了，然后多出去走一下。
嗯，对，
最近这个西雅图天气真的不怎么样，今年很特别。
应该是很寻常啊，都是这样，都要到7月才会好。
现在见到每一个人第一句话都是说：“哦，还在下雨。”
就是啊。
日常的话题。
嗯哼。
那好，不耽误你们上课先。
OK，我们现在就开始哈。As we just mentioned, this is our very last class. April 19th, that's today. And we're going to talk about the movie, Mrs. Dalloway. And this is being live streamed on YouTube, and you can find it on YouTube afterwards. But this is the last class. Mrs. Dalloway can be found on YouTube for free. And I think it's very good when the movie is free on YouTube because, like this movie, you want to watch it again, not just once. It's a lovely movie, very well made. And we're going to talk about Virginia Woolf and Vanessa Redgrave, who played Mrs. Dalloway in this movie. When she was a middle-aged woman, she started to become a very famous actress when she was young. As to Virginia Woolf, this is one of her later books, and she committed suicide a couple years later. This is a poster for the movie. I think it's a television movie, which we usually consider a television movie as a second-class movie because if it's a really good movie, they would have enough money to put it through the theater. But this movie is quite lovely. In fact, my sister repeatedly told me that she loved this movie very much. And I believe I've seen it twice. What I mean is I've seen it before, but this one came quite accidentally. I was not looking for a movie at all, and it popped a so-called YouTube autoplay, and it just started. And so I started to watch it and decided to use this to replace the other one I chose, which is Of Mice and Men. I've seen that movie in different versions several times, so I just chose it without actually watching it. And when I sat down to watch the movie, I realized that it was not a free movie, so I decided I should look for a new movie, and this one popped up, as I just mentioned. It's a 1997 movie called Mrs. Dalloway. It's directed by Marlene Goris and stars Vanessa Redgrave, based on the 1925 novel by Virginia Woolf. And I've never heard of Marlene Goris, this name, and since the name is a little bit strange, it turns out that she is Dutch. She's from the Netherlands. Movie industry is, of course, the biggest movie industry is in the world is American movie, and because of the language, British movies are very much in being played everywhere else as well. But of course, American movies is on top of the world, and they have lots of money, and they have the business expertise to put something through with the the production and the filming and marketing. All these are all in place, so it's easy to have a movie done by an American system. So when there is someone who's not in this system, like Marlene Goris, you would look into it with curiosity, because how did a Dutch movie director get to make a movie and got it released in the mainstream American media? So first of all, I would like to see if anyone wants to talk about the story of the movie. Did you like it, and what do you like about it, and so on and so forth. At first, I just thought it's such a wonderful English movie with people in the society totally very English. But then I realized it was made by a Dutch director. I was really surprised. And it seemed that she was doing really well in the business. And if you look at this movie, it is really a very well done movie. As I just mentioned, my sister Eileen loved it very much, and I liked it very much too. I thought it was very English, but it turns out to be Dutch. Of course, it's not Dutch. It is an English movie, but directed by a Dutch director and a woman. So for a woman to produce an intimate story like this, I can see that how a woman director would have an advantage in taking this story onto the screen. I have this picture of this young woman, actually not too young. It's about my age or our age, 1948, but she really did very well internationally. And on top of that, she's a lesbian, so she's disadvantaged by being a woman and a lesbian, but apparently she is very talented. Because she is a woman, she is noted for being an outspoken feminist. Her very first movie, Antonia's Line, you can see it's all populated by strong women roles, and they were really in control in their life. That's why a woman, especially a lesbian woman, would want to make movies to tell the world that they are not second citizens in the world, that they have their say and they are talented and that they are in control of their lives. So she is the movie Antonia's Line. I just watched it, but I think it's probably not on YouTube. I got it from the library. I probably mentioned last time that recently I found getting library movies is so much easier than before. Maybe you can try it. If you find any movie that are produced, released later in history, I mean, in the last 10 or 20 years, it is quite likely that you can get it from the library by streaming. And then you don't have to order it online, and you don't have to go drive to the library to pick it up and so on. You just sit there and pick the movie and watch it, and you don't even have to return it. It will be returned by itself. So try your library for movies if you don't have, or your streaming service did not work for you. So I was talking about Antonia's Line. It is truly a feminist movie, and it's got several lesbian characters in it too. And this director received an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Films. When it comes to Oscar, sometimes it's not very fair because of politics, but I have come to find that every time they pick a best foreign language film, it was quite outstanding in many ways. And she was the first woman to win a best foreign language film award, which says something about it. Yeah, she is really a good director, I must say. And she has won 2 Golden Calf Awards. And you probably have never heard of Golden Calf, but you have heard of Golden Horse, 金马奖, huh? When we grew up, we were in Taiwan, and the Golden Horse Film Festival Awards is a very, very well-known event. And she being in the Netherlands, she got 2 Golden Calf Awards in the Netherlands. This is a Dutch version of movie film festivals. Okay. And she also got nominated for BAFTA Award. BAFTA is almost as prestigious as Oscar, because BAFTA is the Academy Award in United Kingdom. So whenever you have people in the movie industry winning awards, you first talk about Oscar, and then next you would talk about BAFTA. However, there are so many different countries making movies. They all have their own award, such as Golden Horse. So if you are more into a diverse kind of movies from many different countries, you would have noticed that there are many film festivals all over the world that are prestigious. If you get an award from Cannes or Berlin or Venice or Toronto, all these have very famous international film festivals, and their names would be shortened to something, meaning the place or the country or the city, followed by IFF. IFF means International Film Festival. And in Seattle, we have SIFF, SIFF, which is a Seattle International Film Festival. We are doing pretty well. I mean, SIFF is doing pretty well. However, compared to many other prestigious film festivals in the world, we were not the top layer. You can look at Cannes or Cannes影展, huh? Or Venice would be 威尼斯影展, huh? And Berlin would be Berlin, huh? And there are many others very famous. And this one I've never heard of. It is called the NFF, which means Netherlands Film Festival. And they give out award with the Golden Calf, huh? CALF means a very young cow, or a cattle. You can say cattle, that is a group of cows, and the female ones are called cow, and the male ones are called differently. You can call it a bull, or sometimes other names, ox and things like that. But in this case, we have a young one. A calf means maybe under a year. A cow that was born, or a cow or an ox that was a baby and then became not until it became adult, mature, and can reproduce. It's called a calf. And we have a picture of that calf, golden calf, later. However, I want to say a few more words about someone who's not American and made it well in the world of English-speaking film industry. That's this one, Marlene Goris. And if you were from Taiwan, you would understand there are Li An and maybe Zhou Meiling. I have not heard of Zhou Meiling until today, and her first name is called Zero, and she is also a lesbian filmmaker, but she is very well respected, and she's very hardworking with lots of film under her belt. We say somebody who has done a lot of things, we say under her belt, as if they were all hanging from her belt or his belt. Okay. So, belt is a 皮带, I have done a lot of work. Then I would say that I have a lot of accomplishment under my belt. So Zhou Meiling is such a Taiwanese film producer and director and so on. And she has a lesbian partner called Liu Yunho. And they always collaborate together. And when they, Liu Yunho would write the script. And when they do a project, it'll be produced by their own company, which is called Zero and the Ho Ho Film. That's their film production company called the Zero plus Ho Ho. Zhou Meiling is Zero and the Ho Ho is Liu Yunho. And you will be amazed by the kind of work they did. They did a lot of different kinds of work, not just documentary and feature films and the TV and many other things. And right now they're doing a 6-city rainbow project, which means they go to 6 major cities in Asia and do stories about lesbian women's life. Okay. So you may not have heard of Zhou Meiling, but you have certainly heard of Li An. Li An is right now very, very well acknowledged in the film industry. Of course, he started out doing Taiwanese American movies, for example, Xi Yan, The Wedding Banquet, is actually a film made in America with most of the characters were from Taiwan. And then he became very, very well known, certainly because he is commercially bankable. In the movie industry, you have to be able to sell tickets in order to be recognized as a force. And The Wedding Banquet was one of the most profitable movies ever made. Maybe on a budget of $30,000, he earned like tens of millions of dollars. So that is enough to make Hollywood turn their heads. They all look into this guy. Who's that guy from Taiwan who could make such profitable movies? And then he made a series of movies that were his own project, and eventually he won Oscar for Best Director and many other awards. I'm sure all of you have seen Li An's movie, but this one, Sense and Sensibility, is an oddball in his repertoire. He made a lot of movies that he particularly took care to find the project and to do it according to his wishes, like Life of Pi, things like that. But this movie, Sense and Sensibility, it was a purely British movie, as that Mrs. Dalloway was. And it was adapted from a Jane Austen novel. And it was a project without him that has a life of its own for quite a while. The people who invested in that movie tried to find different people to play different roles and to find different other people to be behind the camera. And finally, they found Li An, which is a very odd choice because Li An had no background in English literature, but the producer of Sense and Sensibility decided to go out of his way to hire Li An because he saw in Li An something that just tells him it's a good bet to steer this very much English story. And he was right. And that was a big money maker as well. Okay, and Li An got this award. You see, we have Li An OBS, and when look at it, it looks like one of those British orders given out to international big shots, whoever it was. Could be a politician or a charity, an philanthropist. Okay, sorry. Philanthropist is someone who does charity work, like Bill Gates. Philo means love. Anthropo means people. So if you love people, let me see if I can spell this word for you. We have anthropologist, which is 人类学家, but philanthropist. I hope this is right. This means 这个做慈善家就是爱人的人他做的事情都是为了爱人的So why are we talking about this? Philanthropist. I don't know why I talk about this. Do you? Anyway, yeah, I was talking about those British
OBS.
Yes, OBS. Yes. I was talking about people who were knighted or were awarded the honor to have the word dame, D-A-M-E, dame, in front of their word, their name, because of this award they got from the King or Queen of England. And so when you look at the OBS, you thought, oh, that must be one of those, but it's not. It is our 景星勋章. This is one of the 景星勋章. You probably heard of it when you were growing up. It's a civilian order. The key word is order. This order means a 勋章. If it's an order of the British Empire, then you have something BE. BE means British Empire. But this one is not awarded by the Queen Elizabeth. It is an award given by the Republic of China. Okay, and Li An certainly is doing a great deal of work and very accomplished and brought fame and fortune to his mother country. So he was given this 景星勋章. And let's come back to Sense and Sensibility. It is one of Jane Austen's stories. And because Li An did such a wonderful job, it cost, okay, the second bullet says, Sense and Sensibility contributed to a resurgence in popularity of Austen's work. Jane Austen is a very popular novelist in England, and her stories had traditionally been turned into movies many times. And I remember when I was young, I've seen Pride and Prejudice with this main character played by Greer Garson. Her name is Gelia Jasun, and Darcy was played by Sir Laurence Olivier. Okay, Lao Lun Sali for So that was when decades since I grew up, I always understand that movie was the best adaptation of a Jane Austen novel called Pride and Prejudice, 傲慢与偏见. So it's not that Jane Austen was not popular. She was very popular in the movie industry. However, she was never so popular until Leanne came around. When Leanne made Sense and Sensibility, Jane Austen novels just exploded onto the scene, and you could find Pride and Prejudice like 3 different versions in 5 years or something like that. It was just hot. And it was all because of Leanne in a certain way, if you agree with that. It's arguably so, but because of her his very great work in this adaptation, that Jane Austen's novel experienced a huge resurgence. Surge is like a 浪这样子涌起来. Resurgence is certainly the return of the surge. And this version of Leanne's movie caused Jane Austen's work to resurge and led to many more productions in similar genre. And since Austen wrote many novels, maybe only 1 or 2 were made into movies for 100 years, but after Leanne, it's just about every year you see different productions. Some of her very lesser known stories were all turned into movies because it's so bankable. So-called bankable means moneymaker. We can say these movies are bankable. In the making of movies, you have to have a lot of money. In the old days, you can make a movie on a shoestring. We say on a shoestring, 就是用一个鞋带这样就可以把一个电影做出来. Make a movie on a shoestring. Some people made a movie by using their credit card. They don't have any money. They just use credit card. However, nowadays, big movies all cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's a huge industry. So if you cannot show investor that you are going to sell tickets, nobody wants to buy into your project. So that's one of the reasons why Jane Austen's stories are so popular today, because there are so many people who just want to wait. They're so eager to watch any Jane Austen movies. And of course, they are mostly women. Okay. Jane Austen is like Virginia Woolf, or the other way around. Virginia Woolf is like Jane Austen. They write very well, and they thought that is a good way for them to let people know that female writers, or female, in short, all the women in the world were being discriminated against. As a writer, they could not find a publisher, and all the men in that industry looked down upon women. So it's very hard for women to get ahead in that business. And to expand on this theory, it is for all the women in the world, whatever line of work, or even if you're not working in your life, you're being discriminated by men, and we depend on these women writers to show the world. They could tell it much better than we do, and they could show how this world is really misogynistic. What that means, discriminates against women. For one thing, their women in their stories, they always are sensible or talented or whatever, but they, for one thing, they could not inherit the house from their father because the law forbid them. If you have seen Pride and Prejudice, in the beginning, the father is well-to-do, has a big house and so on, and he has 5 daughters. And when he dies, none of these daughters can get this house passed on to them because they are women. And you have this nephew who is really a not talented person who came to look at this house and see that eventually when the owner died, he will be the owner of this house. Instead, all these fabulous 5 beautiful, talented women that are living there. This is just to shine a big light on the injustice of the British law, which is or was the law of every country, in Taiwan as well. I heard that, of course, my family was poor, but I heard the rich people, they could not pass on the inheritance to their daughters. So they would give the daughters a large dowry when they get married, so that the daughters can get a head start in life with some money, like cash and furniture and appliances and things like that. But of course, the laws in many countries are different now, but it took 100 years to have them changed. And these women, female writers they could, you could thank them for what they did. And so like Virginia Woolf, she not only writes novels, she also writes essays to show people how the world is unfair to women and what should be done. Okay, let's just move on to this NFF. This is a picture of the building of NFF, which is the Netherlands Film Festival, and they have this Golden Calf Award made into a big statue and put in front of this this building with a pound. I think this was given in Utrecht or some big city in the Netherlands, but it's not in Amsterdam. And this is called a Golden Calf, NFF, and the Golden Calf here is written in their language. You can see it's similar to Golden Calf. Okay, and I just mentioned there are such international film festivals, and the words are shortened into IFF, and with a different letter in front, like TIFF. TIFF could be Tbilisi IFF or Thessalonica Film Festival, or Tigerland in India, or Tokyo, or Toronto, or Transylvania in Romania. And this last one I cannot pronounce. It's in Norway. TIFF could be used to represent any of these international film festivals located all over the world in the city that they chose a word with T in the front. So to briefly mention this film festival, they would say TIFF, but it could be any one of these. In the Western world, Toronto one is probably the most famous, but of course in Asia you would have Tokyo, and in India you have Tigerland. India is where tiger originally came from, so they like to use something powerful to represent this thing. So they have Tigerland, just like Golden Horse was used by Taiwanese film industry. And Thessalonica is in Greece, and Tbilisi is in Georgia. These are much lesser known. And of course, I just mentioned that we in Seattle, we have SIFF, SIFF. Okay, that's enough about this movie industry. Let's start to talk about Virginia Woolf. And this movie, Mrs. Dalloway, was written in 1925. And you can see this cover of the novel is very... from today's point of view, it's not well produced. The publication is kind of rudimentary. There is one, let me see, where is it? When we talk about her other stories, so this is the one I was looking for. You can see that's published by a similar publisher, which turns out to be Virginia Woolf's own publication company. She and her husband, Leonard Woolf, opened a business to publish books. So many of her books were published by this company, and many other people she knew used her publishing company as well. So this is just a little bit about their company. Okay, now this is the book called Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. In October, Time Magazine, October of 2005, Time Magazine started to do a list of 100 best English language novels written since 1923. That was the year Time Magazine came to be established. So of the 100 best English language novels, Mrs. Dalloway was one of them. When Virginia Woolf was writing this book, she started out with some short stories. She had 2 short stories which she combined to become this movie, and the title she gave to that new novel is called The Hours. It means, I'm just guessing, that she's talking about a middle-aged woman who is successful and had a good marriage, and she was going to throw a party. As you know, that this movie is about a party that she is going to throw. When you do a party kind of lavishly, you throw a party, which means you really do and let people know it's a big event. You throw a party. So this is an hour-by-hour story about a wealthy woman throwing a party. So the movies or the book, the novel started with her getting up and start to prepare for the party, first by going out to buy flowers. And little by little, she's doing all different things until close to the end of the story, she was actually throwing the party with guests coming and so on and so forth. So this is a story about not a young girl falling in love, or about some dashing young man going out to fight a war or whatever. It's just a middle-aged woman who looked back on her life while preparing for a party. That's all there is. And there is not very much of a story you can tell. It's just that she went out and bought things and passed by the park and things like that. So the title of the book in the beginning was called The Hours, but when it was published, she changed the title to Mrs. Dalloway. And The Hours means that this person was looking back at her life, where she did was right or wrong, and whether she would change it, or whether she had the good friends that she now remembers, and so on. So it's not a big story. That's why it's called The Hours. It's just a passing of time on that day. So the story is about Clarissa. She was preparing for a party to host that very evening. And she is always looking back into herself and thinking about what she did in the past and how something turned out to be this way or that way. So it's a very interior, introspective story about her looking at herself. Okay. So, and of course, when you look at yourself, you were thinking about all the things in the past that happened to you. She's not planning to do something dashing tomorrow. She is just looking back at her own life. And that the background of the story is between the two wars. It was written in 1825, and that was a few years after the First World War and way before the Second World War. So it is about her time, her country, and her life. There are several things that people like to quote about it in this story, or it's also in this movie. Mrs. Dalloway said, "It is 1,000 pities never to say what one feels." It is just something that he feels that if you like something or love something or want something in your life, don't keep quiet about it. You can enjoy the moment and let people around you to understand your feeling, what you want, and so on. So this is something that we should keep in mind. If you have something that you don't tell others, then you'll come to regret that. Yeah, it's 1,000 pities. And there's also a part of the story about an airplane writing letters in the sky. This just happens to be something that was first time done in the world. And of course, it was in London, and she was walking around buying flowers and so on, and passing in the park, and the people were all looking in the skies to see what this airplane was writing in the sky, which is a novel thing. To us, it happens so many times that we don't even want to bother. But that was the first time that people noticed this very strange thing that's happening. And this airplane pilot, being probably not very expert in this field, wrote several letters that people could not figure out what they mean. It turns out to be an advertisement done by a newspaper company, but you don't have to know what it was about. It's just something that caught people's attention at that time. The story, as I mentioned, is not much of a story, but it is about this woman who looked at her life and wanting to know the meaning of an individual in an ever-changing world, because so many things happened since she was young. For example, she fell in love, but she chose not to marry her sweetheart. All these things are changing in her life, one after another. And now she is like 51 years old. And she realized that people can now look back into their life and see the changes in their life. And in this movie, especially, you can hear the clock called the Big Ben sounding every quarter of an hour. I think it sings da 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 dee da, things like that. Okay, that's the clock in London on the clock tower in the Parliament, and that is called the Big Ben. This also echoes the working title of the movie, which working title of the novel, which is called The Hour. The Hour was the theme of Virginia Woolf's novel in Mrs. Dalloway. And this style is called the 意识流, stream of consciousness is 翻译成意识流. Before Virginia Woolf and James Joyce and so on, before the 20th century, there were lots of people writing novels, and they would tell you a story. For example, the king saw an oracle, like Oedipus Rex. They would tell you what happened and who are these people and something and so on and so forth. But starting with stream of consciousness, the novelist tried to dig into the thoughts inside people, not just the main character, but most of the people in the story. They would tell you what they were thinking or what they want you to know. This is called the stream of consciousness. It's not really a part of the events of the story, but it is the thinking of the people in the book. Virginia Woolf was one of these novelists, and 1 year before Mrs. Dalloway, James Joyce wrote Ulysses, which is considered the number one 意识流 novel. And in America, you have maybe William Faulkner and other people also in this same type of writing. So you may have heard about 意识流 before, but the key about this is that it tells you what the person is thinking. That's why it's called 意识流. And sometimes they were so much lost in the thought that the readers could not figure out what the story was. Okay. So the second bullet on this slide says, it is an example of stream of consciousness storytelling. Every scene closely tracks the momentary thoughts of a particular character. Okay. And James Joyce wrote Ulysses in 1922. It was a story that was modeled after Homer's Iliad. Homer 就是荷马哈。Iliad 我们就直翻叫做伊利亚德哈。The Iliad and the Odyssey. Odyssey is Ulysses. The hero in the story or epic poem by Homer in Odyssey. Okay. Odyssey is now used to describe a long journey with adventures on the way. but it was a story of Ulysses, who, after the Trojan War, they won the war, 这个特洛战争, that was maybe 500 or 700 years before Christ. After the Trojan War, Ulysses took the followers on the big ship and went home. And the things that happened that he encountered on this voyage, which took 10 years. And James Joyce, an Irish writer, he did a novel called The Ulysses. It is modeled after that Greek epic story of this sailing of a ship, by talking about a person who lives in Dublin. Dublin is the Irish capital. So when this book came out, people were shocked because they've never seen a stream of consciousness story. And then Mrs. Dalloway came out the next year after Ulysses. But certainly she, Virginia Woolf, had the time to read that novel, but she did not like it. She thought it was, you have a wonderful pen you can use to write a great story, and it should be elegant and beautiful and about high-minded thoughts. However, James Joyce is writing about, in Virginia Woolf's view, he's writing about a vulgar character, always thinking about sex. And she did not like that book at all, but she came up with a different, and she thought her book is really much better than Ulysses. I'm sure she would think so. Okay. Now here's a movie called The Hours. It was from a book written by Michael Cunningham, who won a Pulitzer Prize for writing this novel in 1999. And this movie was adapted by David Hare. And he wrote the script based on Michael Cunningham's novel, which was in turn based on Mrs. Dalloway. All these people, they read Mrs. Dalloway, and they were moved by the thoughts in that book. So Michael Cunningham wrote a novel with 3 Mrs. Dalloways. In this book, The Hours, there are 3 people, 3 women. Each one is a variation of Mrs. Dalloway. And the first one is Virginia Woolf, played by Nicole Kidman. She won an Oscar for it, even though her role was not so much in the movie with 3 big characters, but she won the Oscar for it, and very notably for having an artificial nose, because she wanted, or the producer and the director, they all wanted her to have a fake nose so that she would look more like Virginia Woolf. That is something people often poke fun of, because she does not look like Nicole Kidman at all. If you could find this movie, this is a well-received movie, winning a lot of awards. And besides Nicole Kidman, we have Julianne Moore, who plays a Mrs. Dalloway in the 1950s, the kind of role that Mrs. Dalloway was playing in the 1922 or something like that. And the last one was modern day Virginia Woolf, or modern day Mrs. Dalloway. She was throwing a party in, I don't know, in either the beginning of, probably in late 20th century. That was, she was played by Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep by then was a very famous actress and was the most decorated actress ever in the world. So this is a movie worth watching if you haven't seen it. And you could conceivably watch it many times because of all the things that's in it. And you can find how this part is related to the story Mrs. Dalloway. We return to the stream of consciousness. Virginia Woolf blurs the distinction between direct and indirect speeches. For movie, it's very easy to carry this out. You would have this character moving around in the movie, and the narrative would be what she was thinking at that moment. She would say, oh, this guy is such a fool, or, oh, I love my husband, or whatever it was she was thinking. You can watch the movie and hear what she was thinking. She was not speaking out loud to anybody, but in the movie, she was saying that loud to herself. No one around her knew what she was thinking, but we, the audience, would know that. So stream of consciousness is a great kind of story to be told in a movie. So this character would either be the all-know role of a person. She would be able to tell you all these people, the relationship and so on. It was like a chorus in the Greek tragedy. In the Greek tragedy, I'm sorry, Homer was like 7th century BC, while Aristotle was like 500 years before Christ. So we're talking about Greek tragedy. They usually have a chorus of maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 people standing on the stage, and they would play the role of being the omniscient person because they know what happened before and what is going to happen, and they tell the audience. On the other hand, this like Mrs. Dalloway in this movie, she could be conducting a monologue, which is a 单独的对话哈，一个人自言自语哈，interior monologue. She could be talking to herself, not in addition to telling people the past and whatever was happening. She could be telling people about how she feels. And a soliloquy, which is like the most famous soliloquy would be Hamlet holding on a skull, a head of a skull, and giving out a very long speech all by himself. That is a soliloquy. So it's a little different. A soliloquy is like a person making a speech, while an interior monologue could be some casual comment a person made in her head, but not telling other people. But all these ways of speaking out to the audience is very interesting and very easily carried out in a stream of consciousness kind of story. So 就是自言自语的一种形式. And in this story, the narration follows at least 20 characters. So when Virginia Woolf was writing this novel, each character, at least 20 in this book, were expressing their thoughts in a way to themselves or to the reader. And Mrs. Dalloway in particular, this book, which turned into a movie, you have 3 major characters. There's Clarissa Dalloway, that was played by Vanessa Redgrave, and Peter Walsh, and Septimus Smith. These are the 3 major characters who express their inner feelings in the story, in the film or in the novel. Peter Walsh was a a young man she fell in love with, and he also fell in love with young Clarissa, who was not married to Mr. Dalloway yet. So when she was growing up, she has a different last name. So Peter Walsh would be the young man who wanted to marry her, but she felt that he was too controlling and she would lose her inner self. She would have to twist her soul in order to marry this man, even though she loved this young man very much. And the third person is the person who eventually committed suicide by throwing himself out of the window from an apartment window from several stories high. And his name is Septimus Smith. And he was a soldier in the Great War, which is the First World War, and he has seen a lot of carnage, lots of killing and violence, and especially one of his very dear friend was killed in that war. So he would walk about, and very often he would see his dead friend walking towards you. In our movie, in the very beginning, the first thing you see before anything happens is this young man, Septimus Smith. He was with his wife in the park, and he saw his dead friend walking towards you. At that moment, you did not know what was going on. Okay. And this novel was adopted into several movies. Into other media. One of them was an opera. So many people like to write opera about modern day events or novels. This is not related to the topic, but I want you to be aware of a movie that was released quite recently. It's called Passing in 2021, so it's like 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago probably. It was about two Black women. They grew up together as good friends, and they were not very dark-skinned, but one of them on the left, played by Tessa Thompson, she just acknowledged that she was a Black woman, and she married a Black man who is very accomplished. But then one day she went shopping and she encountered her good friend who was passing. That's what this movie is about, passing, who was passing as a white woman, or his husband and her husband and her other friends in her circle of friends. They thought she was a white woman. And so this Black woman on the left was not easy, had a bad feeling about it, because you're cheating. Even your husband does not know you're not Black. This is a very awkward situation. And both of them acted very well. The other woman on the right is played by Ruth Negga, and they were both nominated for Oscar as Best Actress, and probably both lost to someone else. And I thought about this movie not because it was a very good movie, very well produced, but because in the end, this woman was on at a party on second floor or maybe fifth floor. I don't know which floor. She was in an apartment in a party, and when her husband found out she was Black, and her husband was a real racist. He openly said he hates Black people and so on. So when that happened, she just jumped through the open window and killed herself, just as Septimus Smith did in Mrs. Dalloway. And I'm sure the director have seen that movie because it was almost identical. You look down from the window and saw the steel spikes of the fence, and she just jumped over and killed herself there. That was a good movie to watch if you have the chance. And Virginia Woolf was born in 1882, and she died by suicide, by drowning herself in the river. If you have seen the movie The Hours, you would see in the very beginning, in the opening scene, Nicole Kidman playing Virginia Woolf. She wore a longish coat or whatever, and she started to put rocks into her pocket, and she waded into the water and drowned herself. And then, of course, there's backlash telling you about who she was and what her life was about, and so on. She's an English writer, considered one of the most important modernist 20th century author. When we talk about stream of consciousness, that's a modernist kind of novel writing, and she's a pioneer in the use of stream of consciousness as a narrative device. Use this way, this device. Nowadays, we say, your phone is a device and your tablet is a device. A device is just something that you use. And in this case, Virginia Woolf and her friends, they use the stream of consciousness as a narrative device. So device is a 工具. She was born in an affluent household, which means her family was very rich in London. So she lived in London, and later she moved from Kensington, which is south of the park, and to Bloomsbury, which is the West End, which is to the east of Kensington. Anyway, she was living in a big household because both parents have children from other marriages. So this household has more than 10 children mixed here. And the parents were wealthy and well-educated, and they homeschooled her, which means she did not go to school for elementary school and middle school, but her parents taught her in school because her parents were more than able to give her a good education. But later she went to the women's college. She went to the ladies' department of King's College in London. And then she met all kinds of people there. And many of them also went to Oxford and Cambridge. So eventually they formed a group. And when she moved to Bloomsbury Square, these people often came to household there, including her household, and they sort of formed a group of people, formed the Bloomsbury set or Bloomsbury group. Okay, so that is a very important part of the literature history in England. Okay, so when you talk about literature at the end of 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, Virginia Woolf was a big part in that group, which is called the Bloomsbury group or Bloomsbury set. And they often have parties or get together in Bloomsbury Square. The first time I went to London, I booked a hotel right on Bloomsbury Square, and later I went to Russell Square and so on. That was just within a stone's throw from the library. Well, the library is no longer there. The museum, British Museum, is world famous for its collection of wonderful things, which they looted all over from the world. Just the part of Chinese artifacts they own fill many, many rooms. And I've been there many times and I never reached the Chinese section because it is way above on the second floor in the back. So I always went in and went to see, Assyrian or Egyptian artifacts. Lots of things that you cannot see in Egypt or in Iraq or Iran. They're all there in the British Museum. If you go to London, make sure to go to British Museum. You can stay there for months and months and not looking at the same thing twice. And of course, all the museums in London, almost all, 99% of the museums are free. That is a big selling point. You only have to find a cheap hotel and be there and take the subway, or they call underground. It is a very, very tourist-friendly place for you to see tons of things on the shoestring. You don't spend too much money, and you could see so much more than if you spend a lot of money going to other countries. So she went to King's College London, and she studied classics. Well, actually, as I mentioned, I stayed at Bloomsbury Square and Russell Square, and I could easily walk to King's College in London. When I was there was a Yuan You Hui on that day. They were selling different kinds of food. She is really into the promotion of higher education of women and the women's rights movement. So she being in the particular place to be an advocate for women getting their proper education and having their right to, for example, inheritance from their parents and things like that. She was very much a part of those movements. And people would say she inspired a feminist movement and gave the voice to women in the middle part of 20th century. Okay, this is another picture. The other one was on the side, and this is from the front. She is a pretty nice looking woman. However, the group of people she is with, they were all bisexual or homosexual or adulterous, which means they were married, but they had affairs left and right with not lots of other people, including her and her husband. So one of her women lover was called the Vita Sackville West. That's the most famous because she wrote books about her, and she wrote about her in the diary. And that's not the one of her female lovers. She's had tons of them, one after another. They seem to fall in love very easily, and they had no control. They don't follow the Victorian moral behavior rules, okay? And she and her husband opened a publication house called Hogarth Press. And as I just mentioned, several of her books were published by this publishing company called Hogarth. And one of the book called Orlando is about the story of Vita Sackville West's life. Vita came from a very wealthy and aristocratic family. And this story called Orlando is about her family tree, all because this character, the leading character, protagonist in this novel called Orlando, she lived for several hundred years, and she was a man in the beginning, and in the middle of the movie she became a woman. So it's not a fact filled story, but because of the life experience of this woman throughout this novel, you can see that she was acquainted with many literally famous English writers. So that alone is enough for you to want to read the story about all these famous writers. Okay. Her most famous stories, novels were Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, and Orlando. These three are the most famous ones. And when we watch this movie, we like this movie very much, even though it doesn't have fantastic stories. But if you watch any of the others, you would you wouldn't be able to find any story at all in the novel To the Lighthouse, and you would be so busy figuring out all these things throughout hundreds and hundreds of years of stories in Orlando. So she is a very versatile writer, and all these books were very much discussed by the professors in colleges and so on. Yeah, there are, I'm sure, important professors all over the world in university whose expertise is in Virginia Woolf. Not just her work, but also her view and her role in the feminist movements and so on and so forth. She wrote a very famous essay called A Room of One's Own, which means that a woman should have a room of her own so that she could do her things, like writing stories. Whatever a woman wants to do in her private life, she should have a room of her own instead of just taking care of the needs of the husband and the household and the children. Nowadays, or traditionally, for thousands of years, women do not have a room of her own, especially after she got married. Okay, so this is what it's about. And here we have about Virginia Woolf's mental illness. She has had mental illness, 或者叫做精神病哈，我们中国人常常说神经病，其实应该是说精神病哈，就是 mental illness. And she had that problem for a long time. She was institutionalized, which means 她被关在那种精神病院里面哈， especially in the older times. Even now, institution, 这个 mental patient 的institutionalization is quite scary. They could do terrible things to you, like open your brain and poke around and things like that, or give you electric shock. Anyway, so she was committed to an asylum more than once, and eventually she killed herself. And in the modern jargon, you would say that she had a bipolar disorder, but when she was alive, there was not such a term, this psychiatric terminology. Bipolar means 双向极端. So you have North Pole and the South Pole, and the bipolar would mean two opposite poles. Sometimes you're so high and sometimes you're so low. When you're high, you want to drink and you want to party and so on and so forth. And when you're low, you want to hide yourself in the closet, turn off the light, and just crouching in your closet or cover yourself with a comforter or quilt. So that's called a bipolar disorder. 就是你的情绪的 swing of your feeling is suddenly much higher than ordinary people, and then deep lower than any other people, huh? So this is a very difficult thing to have in your life, and so she was often very high or very low. So at age 59 in 1941, she drowned herself in the river. So in this movie, The Hours, you could see that she was having a married life with her sister visiting and her husband working in the publishing house. And she just decided to go out into the river and kill herself. So she is a very important figure in modern English literature. Modern English literature started in the middle part of like a 1750. So it's in the 18th century, and then it went into a different period called the Romanticism. Romanticism is a word to describe many different things in art, like writing, like music, or painting, or sculpturing. Lots of art forms experienced a romantic period. So she came along even after that. In the romantic period, you have people like Chopin and Beethoven in his later life. And in literature, you probably have Wordsworth and other writers in England. So there are three poets like Shelley and Byron and Keats. 雪莱、拜伦跟济慈, those were the later romantic period poets. And before them, like Wordsworth would be the older people in the Romanticism period. And then came Victorian literature. That's about where she is in the Victorian period. And she was halfway into 20th century. That's where you could place Virginia Woolf in modern English literature. So before her, there were several female writers like Jane Austen. Jane Austen was quite early compared to the rest of them. And a little later, there was Mary Shelley, who wrote the book Frankenstein. She was, of course, the second wife of Shelley. And then lots of girls who grew up in Taiwan would know the Bronte sisters. The Bronte sisters, they are Charlotte, Emily, and Anne. They were very talented, and people now say they write Gothic stories because the stories are full of creepy things. The most common would be Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte, with a rich manner, a rich person. What was his name? Fairfield. Okay. Anyway, the rich man, older man, had a wife who had a psychological problem and was locked up in the house. And the man fell in love with this governess who came to teach the child. And that was Jane Eyre. That story was turned into a movie nearly 100 times. Okay, that's probably the most adapted novel in the world, Jane Eyre. She is the older sister, while the younger sister, Emily, wrote Wuthering Heights. In Chinese, we would call that 好笑山庄. That was a stunning story. Nobody has ever written a story like that before, but she died very young. Emily. And Charlotte got to live longer and be recognized as a good writer, a great writer, while Emily died very early on. And after them, there were several female writers, and these are poets, Elizabeth Browning and Christina Rossetti. And then came Virginia Woolf, who is much later than any of those, okay? This is a list of women writers who were awarded a Nobel Prize as early as 1909. That was the first one. Because it's an international award, many of them were not English writers, and they really go out of their way to find people from every corner of the world. So there are not so many female American writers, probably only Toni Morrison. And toward the end, I don't know, maybe Alice Munro. And we had Pearl Buck. Over here you have Pearl Buck, who wrote The Good Earth. All her stories are about China in the early Republic period. Cai Zhenju, huh? Okay, so many of them we were not exposed to their work. But the most recent one last year, this was a French writer, Annie Ernaux. She not only wrote stories, she wrote all kinds of different things. And if you watch a movie based on her story when she was a college kid getting an abortion, that was a recent movie. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, it was recent, like last year. So all the women, just by their own life experience, they can tell a lot more stories than men could tell. And they were often scared or angry because of the unfair society that are treating them. This is about Bloomsbury Group, and I've told you about them maybe a year ago. So this group includes Virginia Woolf and her husband, Leonard Woolf, and Maynard Keynes, who is an economist who influenced the whole world. Every day of our lives, we can feel his economic theories impacting our lives about money supply and about inflation and things like that. E.M. Forster, whose novels were adapted big time into movies. And Lytton Strachey, who wrote many biography and the commentary and essays, yeah. So they together, because of their intellectuality and their friendship, they get to bounce their idea around these big time talents. So they produce the impact that echoes around the world for ages. Yeah. Here's a chart of the members of the group. And here we have Virginia Woolf and her husband here. And this Lytton Strachey. And this is Virginia's siblings. They have the same last name, Stephen. She changed her last name after she married this. And this also came from her extended family. And all these people here, we have John Maynard Keynes, E.M. Forster. They were in different colleges like London, Trinity College and Oxford and Cambridge. Okay. Next book is To the Lighthouse. It is a couple years after Mrs. Dalloway, and it has absolutely no story. It's just about thoughts people had as they went about in their lives. Mostly about a family who usually in the summer go to a vacation home in the sea, on an island over the sea. So it's called To the Lighthouse. And it's all but about their thinking, their philosophy of life. And that's why Virginia Woolf is not big on film adaptation. I mean, very few of her works were adapted into movies because they can't sell very well. But amazingly, after 100 years, Mrs. Dalloway appeared, which was really a nice movie to watch. I am so surprised. And To the Lighthouse was also adapted into films and audio drama and opera and so on and so forth. And Orlando was also difficult to adapt because it's about a woman who was a man and who lived as many hundreds of years going through war and meeting different literary figures. It's very hard to condense into a movie, even though this movie it eventually was made. It was pretty long enough, but it can not include all the different things in that book. So it's like skipping around and you cannot really get hold of what the story was all about. So it was a one woman show on stage with Miranda Richardson on the stage. And Miranda Richardson is not one of the Richardsons, okay? She came from a different family. However, Vanessa Redgrave married Lindsay, not Anderson, okay, married Tony Richardson and had kids. Vanessa Redgrave, she came from a Redgrave family with siblings. So you would say this is a Redgrave family, and a part of it was Richardson. But this is a very big family. And this Orlando was adapted into a play played by Miranda. A one-woman show would be a show with only one person on the stage, and that happens to be a woman. And of course, there are one-man show. They often are about a certain prominent figure in history, such as Henry Fonda playing Clarence Darrow, about all the cases he handled as a lawyer. Of course, there are other stories, such as Mark Twain. And Isabelle Huppert is a French woman. She played this on stage in France, of course. And there were operas based on this. And this is the only movie that's of good proportion. I mean, they spent a lot of money on it and made a very long movie, which I did not like at all. But Tilda Swinton is terrific. She's always good. And she had a new movie last year called 3,000 Years of Longing. It is a twist on this magic lantern. We all know that in 天方夜谭, 1001 Night, one of the major story in that book in Arabian legends was this magic lantern. What's his name? Aladdin. Okay, Aladdin was a young man or a boy who found a magic lantern and he rubbed on it, and poof, a monster showed up and gave him 3 wishes. This is a à la 神话故事哈。You can say it's for children, but it's very magical. And Disney also made one of the movies called Aladdin, that is a fairy tale with a Middle Eastern twist, and it was supposed to have been told by a woman called the Scheherazade. 我们中文叫谢哈拉 Shara, whatever, that's her name. She there was a king in the Arabs, I mean, Arabian king, who hated women because maybe his wife was not faithful to him. So he decided to have one woman every night, and the next morning he would chop the head off of this woman. So this Scheherazade was this woman who decided to volunteer to be one of these women because she hates to see what beautiful young women being killed every day, one a day, by the day, every day. So she went there, and before the king went to bed, she told a story, and with a cliffhanger. She would tell the story at a very high point, and she said, I'll tell you the rest of the story tomorrow. So the king could not execute her for 101 nights. Eventually, the king decided to marry her. So the king stopped killing wives. Okay, so this is a story about many things. One was about open sesame, 芝麻开门, and Aladdin was be flying on a magic carpet, and the thief of Baghdad, and so on. And the story with a twist in this latest movie is called 1,000 Years of Longing. I bet you can find it. It's a pretty interesting movie with Tilda Swinton as the main character. And she found a lamp, and after she robbed it, a 3,000-year-old genie appeared. And that's a story about her love affair with this genie. This is what I want to talk about Virginia Woolf, and we can move on to Vanessa Redgrave. She was a pretty young thing for a while, and then she is old, just like the rest of us. And of course, she is not that pretty, but she gives every movie she appears such an elegance and a wonderful presence. I'm sure you have seen one of her movies. She was in the industry for 60 years. And she's also an activist. She was in the very beginning for Palestinian rights. It's not that she doesn't think that Jews have their rights as well, but the Jews were treating the Palestinians very poorly, treating them like a second-class citizen. And so she wanted people to acknowledge that. As a result, she was boycotted by lots of Jewish people because they think she is a traitor, or not necessarily a traitor. They think she is the enemy. But she has somehow survived. And that was the very beginning of her career. And she got into the movie industry, which to many people, the movie industry in America is entirely under the control of Jewish people. But she was able to survive and did very well. And she was in the business for 6 decades, and she has garnered many accolades, which means awards and praises, accolades, including the Academy Award. She won an award for Julia for a supporting role. She was nominated 6 times, many for the leading actress role. And she also won, not just being nominated, but also won Tony Awards, Emmy Awards, And as a result, that is called a triple crown of acting. You have to win an Academy Award, a Tony Award, and an Emmy Award in order to be a triple crown winner. Huh? Triple crown was used to apply to horse racing. Huh? In the spring, thoroughbred racehorses would compete in Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and the Belmont. That's the 3 horse races that together they were called the Triple Crown. And very rarely would a horse be winning Triple Crown. It's very, very hard. I think Secretariat was probably the worst, the first, and after that there was, I don't know, the Affirmed or something, and it has not been done, I think, since, but you can check it out. I'm not a horse race follower. And here we have Vanessa Redgrave. She is called a DBE, which means a Dame of the most excellent order of the British Empire. Okay, so it's the second grade of the 5-level thing. We talked about this a few months ago. And Vanessa Redgrave was in dozens and dozens of movies, probably close to 100, I would say. So we could only mention a few. She was nominated for the 6 movies on the left-hand side. And the first very early one was Morgan, and there's Isadora, Mary, Queen of Scots, and she won it for Julia. And then she was nominated for Bostonians and Howard's End. So that's about 30 years worth of work. Of course, she's still working. And her other films, many of them, she was only in a cameo role. Her cameo is spelled as C-A-M-E-O. A cameo is a portrait of a person from the side that was carved on a jewelry piece, like a pendant or something, that it was carved as a relief, just half of it, no the other side. So if you are in a movie for a short time, but you were a famous actor or actress, we say that you had a cameo appearance in that movie. For example, A Man for All Seasons, which I mentioned last time was my all-time favorite movie. It has Paul Scofield playing Sir Thomas More, how he offended King Henry VIII and was beheaded. And it's a very long movie with a very heavy role, but in this movie, Vanessa Redgrave had a very short appearance playing Anne Boleyn as the second wife of Henry VIII. Okay, but she was the only leading actress in some of the following movies, like Blow Up with Hemingway, David Hemingway, I think, Camelot with Richard Harris, The Devils, and of course, Murder on the Orient Express is an Agatha Christie movie, which by definition has at least 10 people, all very famous actors and actresses, appearing as murder suspect in this movie. So Vanessa Redgrave was in one of these movies called Murder on the Orient Express. And for all these cameo appearances, Ingrid Bergman was in this same movie, and she won an Oscar for a supporting actress role for this movie. Okay, prick up your ears. And Mission Impossible, that is definitely a Tom Cruise movie, and there were many of them, and she appeared in maybe one of them, I suppose. And that would be an action thriller kind of movie. So she is in all kinds of movies. And the most recent movie that we all have heard about was The Atonement. That was a very good movie, but she was pretty old by that time. And she played the the writer who was at a book signing event when she regrets that when she was a teenager, she made a mistake and causing her sister to lose her love forever because of what she did. The sister's intended lover, who was a servant in the household, he was arrested and sentenced to fight in the First World War in France. And he was there when Dunkirk retreat happened. And he died there. Died of illness, I would say, not by bullet or bomb, but he was probably starving and exhausted and died there. And this is a very moving story. If you haven't seen that 10 years ago, you can look for this. I would say this is one of the greatest movies. And the Camelot is extremely popular. And she was quite young at the time. When I read about the making of this movie just recently, I just laughed because eventually this great movie was made with Richard Harris as King Arthur, and Vanessa Redgrave was the Queen, and Guinevere. And they were very, very good in those roles. However, before the movie was made, I read that the producers and directors, they were trying to hire American actors to be King Arthur and to be Guinevere. And the people they asked for to play King Arthur was Marlon Brando and Gregory Peck and Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole is arguably a British person, but the other two are absolutely American, and they just don't carry that weight. No matter how good they can act, they cannot be King Arthur. They just don't look like it. And Vanessa Redgrave and Richard Harris were both relatively early in their career, so they had to really fight for those roles. And I enjoyed that movie tremendously. If you haven't watched that movie, you really should. Okay, Camelot was a good, great movie. And here's Camelot. The poster was very well drawn. And the director was Joshua Logan. I read his autobiography or memoir. It's not about his whole life, but it's about a few movies that he made, including Camelot. And Alan J. Lerner was the person who wrote the libretto of the musical. So Alan J. Lerner and Frederick Loewe, they were collaborators. They wrote several big hits like My Fair Lady, On a Clear Day You Could See Forever. Brigadoon, okay. And one Clint Eastwood movie, Paint Your Wagon, okay. Paint Your Wagon. These are all musicals. It would be very strange for you to see Clint Eastwood in that movie singing. I wouldn't say I recommend the movie, but it's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And there's a Franco Nero in Camelot, and they had Vanessa and Franco Nero had an affair during the filming, and they produced a son together while Vanessa Redgrave was still married to her husband, Tony Richardson. And of course, later he got a divorce, but she got a divorce and she did not marry Franco Nero, who played Lancelot in that movie. And Vanessa Redgrave had an affair with Timothy Dalton, who was 007 for a while. They were together for more than 10 years with Timothy Dalton, much younger than she is. But later, well, after she had an affair with Franco Nero, when they were both in their 70s, they got married. So they had the son when they were after they finished doing Camelot, but then they were not together for decades and decades. That's a very weird thing to look into. And Isadora is Isadora Duncan, who is a modern dance icon. She is a beautiful woman who danced modern dances. And I think she died in an auto accident when her scarf was caught in the motor of a car. At that time, it was in the early days of people driving cars, and the motor fan was exposed and her scarf was caught in there, and she died of that. And I always remember when I was a kid, my parents told me about a joke about Isadora Duncan and the GBS, who is called the Bernard Shaw. Isadora Duncan once wrote to George Bernard Shaw, and she said, according to the DNA and eugenics, which means 优生学, they should have a child together. She said, think of it, with my body and your brains, what a wonder it would be. When we call a baby, we always say it. We don't say she or he, because it was just a baby. You couldn't tell if it's a boy or a girl, and it does not have much thought as a human being. So a baby is called an it. And not Vanessa, Isadora Duncan wrote to George Bernard Shaw saying, if we have a child, what wonder it would be with my body and your brains. And George Bernard Shaw replied, yes, but what if it had my body and your brains? This is George Bernard Shaw is very humorous and very hurting people, sarcastic. Okay, so that was a movie I haven't seen, Isadora. She was nominated for an Oscar for playing Isadora, so she has to learn some kind of dancing as well. And she was also nominated for playing Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1971. And this is biographical, though it was not all truth. This, as well as the opera based on Mary, Queen of Scots, I think it's called Mary Stuart. Okay, it was a Donizetti opera. Both deliberately made the mistake, historically incorrect statement that Mary, Queen of Scots, and Queen Elizabeth I, they had a private meeting to discuss things, but they never met each other. That's not true, but they chose this version of the fake story to write the movie and the opera. And this movie was based on a novel called Mary, Queen of Scots, written by Antonia Fraser. Antonia was the wife of Harold Pinter, who is a very famous British playwright, one of the angry young men. One of them wrote Look Back in Anger and became very famous. So these group of people are called angry young men. And Antonia Fraser was the wife of Harold Pinter in that group. And in this movie about two famous people, in addition to Mary, Queen of Scots, the other one Queen Elizabeth I was played by Glenda Jackson. Glenda Jackson was all the rage when she suddenly turned out to be an actress, and she won 2 Oscars in a row and was praised left and right. And then she disappeared because she went into politics. She had turned into not PM, but an MP. An MP in British government is a member of the parliament. So she won a seat very early on and continued to go into politics. Once and again, all the congressmen and senators, they have to be re-elected every so often, like every 2 years for Congress representatives, and every 6 years for senator. I don't know how many years you have to get re-elected, but Glenda Jackson was in there once and twice and 3 times and so on and so forth. She's still there. So she did not become a career actress, though I did see a recent movie about 3 years ago on AARP. She replayed a woman who had Alzheimer or something. Yeah. And the same story was recently redone in 2018 by Saoirse Ronan and Margot Robbie. Okay, so they were 2 much younger people, huh? You can say they're still in their 20s and 30s, while Vanessa Redgrave and Glenda Jackson, they were maybe in their 30s and 40s. Anyway, these are very young versions of the same 2 queens. And as I like to say, Saoirse Ronan's name is called here we have her name, Saoirse Ronan. Okay, that's her name. Because she's Irish. And Julia, of course, is the movie that brought Vanessa Redgrave her Academy Award. This was a movie with Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda had, you may say, communist-leaning ideas. During the Vietnam War, she famously or infamously, she went to North Vietnam and held a press conference saying these are people who are trying to survive, and she wants to become independent from all you ugly European colonialists. So she had a very problem with her fame, and she did several movies with those communist-leaning thoughts, and this is one of them. And she adores Vanessa Redgrave, and she hired Vanessa Redgrave to play Julia in this movie called Julia, in which Jane Fonda played the leading role. She was Lillian Hellman, a famous American writer who had a lover called Dashiell Hammett. They were a very famous couple, but they have leftist leanings, and she made this movie about her acquaintance with Julia, who is a person, an activist who was protesting against Nazi Germany and was arrested and probably killed in prison. I don't remember too clearly, but this is a Jane Fonda movie, and Vanessa Redgrave did the role of Julia. And later on, she was nominated twice for Oscar. And these are all British novels adapted into movies. This is Bostonian, based on Henry James. I'm sorry, Henry James is American, but he lived in England for most of his career and writing about people in England. And this story is about the Bostonian, and he also wrote another one about American people who, young men or rich people who went to England to live in London. And that's why I say these are English stories. They were American people who live in England. So Henry James is another famous writer who wrote as an American writer about England. Okay, several of his stories were turned into movies. Among them, the most famous would be The Turn of the Screw. It's about a ghost story. It was made into many movies and stage plays and operas and so on. So that was a big hit of Henry James. And I like his writing very much. And he has a brother, I think, who is a famous American philosopher. They all came from Boston here. Okay, so you have Christopher Reeve, who is the Bostonian in this movie because he's totally American, living in England. Jessica Tandy, later in her life, when she was a very old lady, she won an Oscar for driving Miss Daisy. And incidentally, Driving Miss Daisy, before it was turned into a movie, was a Broadway play, and Vanessa Redgrave played the very same role in that story on stage. So Vanessa Redgrave was on stage in many, many productions. So you can say that almost all the British actors and actresses, they have one foot in movies and the other foot on stage. And this is another one. The last one, Vanessa Redgrave was nominated for an Oscar. It's called Howard's End. And it has Anthony Hopkins and Helen Bonham Carter and Emma Thompson. Those are all British actors. And it's a Merchant Ivory production. And the story was from E.M. Forster. Merchant Ivory made 44 movies together, based in India, but with maybe half British, half Indian staff. And they made 44 movies, and they did not hit it big until A Room with a View. That was halfway into their career, and they become very famous since then. A Room with a View and Maurice, these are all Merchant and Ivory movies, and they were adaptation of E.M. Forster novels. Another E.M. Forster novel, which was adopted and became a movie, was directed by David Lean. That is A Passage to India. So for a long while, British movies were all the rage. They were adaptations of British novels. Those stories would discuss the class differences because British has very rigid class regulation. I mean, rich people are on top and the poor people they hire, or like slaves working on their manor downstairs. For example, English TV series is called Upstairs, Downstairs. It is about the rich people and the poor people they hire working in the household. And Howard's End is about such a household, okay? And Anthony Hopkins was the first person listed on the poster. We're not going into detail about Merchant Ivory. There are two people, Ishmael Merchant and James Ivory. One is a producer and one is a director and sometimes writer. And they made a lot of movies, and they were guaranteed to have a huge audience. So it's easy for them to bankroll this movies. And this is The Atonement I just mentioned, when Keira Knightley and James McAvoy were both in their early stage of their career. Yes, it's a very moving story. And later on, they all became very, very famous. This is about Vanessa Redgrave. She was on stage and she won Olivier Awards, just like our Tony Awards. That name is named after Laurence Olivier, who is a big figure in British stage production as an actor and a producer. And Vanessa Redgrave was first in a play called As You Like It, which is William Shakespeare's comedy. And she continued to be acting even now when she is about our age, and maybe a little older than us, depending on who you are. And she was on stage playing The Year of Magical Thinking. That is also a one-woman show. It's a book from a book written by Joan Didion. The year after her husband died, they were just soulmates for life for many, many years. And when her husband died, she had a year in which she was not knowing where she was. That's called The Year of Magical Thinking. And we have David Hare again, and he directed this play. So he was a director here, and he wrote a script for The Hours about three Mrs. Dalloway kind of people. And Vanessa Redgrave was also in Driving Miss Daisy on stage. And she came from the big family called the Redgrave clan. A clan is a big family. Her father is Michael Redgrave and her mother is Rachel. And they were both famous actors. Michael Redgrave was, people say his name in a breath with Laurence Olivier and maybe John Gielgud. They were an older generation of actors, and he was very, very famous for a while. And he and his wife had three children. They're Lynn and Vanessa and Corinne. Corinne is the boy, and the other two are girls. And Vanessa Redgrave, right now, she is the wife of Franco Nero, with whom she had a child in early 70s. And she herself is a mother of many actors and actresses. Her daughters are Jolie Richardson and Natasha Richardson. They were all very, very famous. And her son with Franco Nero is a director and a screenwriter. His name is Carlo Gabriel Nero. And she is also, what I mean is her brother Corinne also had children who are actors like Gemma Redgrave. The brother would have all the children carrying the Redgrave last name, while Lynn and Vanessa could no longer name their children using the last name Redgrave because they are women. Okay, so Vanessa's daughter, Natasha Richardson, married Liam Neeson, who is a very famous Irish actor nowadays. After he turned 60, he became an action hero. Never in his dream did he ever dream that he would become an action hero. Okay, so unfortunately, Natasha had a ski accident and died almost the same day, leaving Liam Neeson with children that we learned that he had a difficult raising children by himself, very painful. And there are other people Okay, so Neeson had the children with with the last name Neeson, but that was not his first marriage. So Natasha married Liam Neeson after he was divorced, and there's a big chart. That's the last slide I have today. If you're interested, you can look for this. Just Google for the Redgrave clan, and you will find this picture. So you have the couple who are Michael and Rachel on top, and they had 3 children. They are Vanessa, Lynn, and Corinne. And by far more famous is Vanessa. Lynn is not as pretty, so her range is limited, and she was nominated, for example, for a movie called The Georgie Girls. She was nominated very early on when she was young. And later, I saw her as a housemaid in Monster and what? I forgot what the name was, but it had Brendan Fraser and the gay actor who was in Lord of the Rings playing Gandalf. Okay. Anyway, she was a housemaid playing a kind of a just a maid with just carrying tea and so on. That's what people can do, I guess. When you're older, you cannot play the young leading girls anymore. Okay. So this are the 2 things, 2 people I talked about today as my last class. I hope you have seen some of the movies, especially this movie. I really highly recommend. This Dutch director, female or lesbian director, is just wonderful. You could put you put yourself in their shoes. That is how much you feel for this person, and you identify with this person, and you could think, because she is telling you what she was thinking about. This is a wonderful movie. And of course, if you have the opportunity, make sure to watch some of the other movies like Camelot, Man for All Seasons, or Atonement. These are all very good movies. Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much, Joe.
You're welcome.
就谢谢你咯，辛苦你了，我们
不客气。
受益良多。
Thank you. I really am happy that you would be here day after or month after month, listen to my talk, which is kind of monotonous.
We learned a lot, and you spend a lot of time to prepare all the information.
Yeah, I did spend too much time. I'm sorry. I really could not afford to spend so much time now that the COVID thing is over. I really need to get out of there.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Joe, from an Englishman.
Oh yeah, thank you. Okay, nothing to say?
这些资料都会在建安的那个 link 里面吗？
They have the recording on YouTube. You can see the whole thing. I just talked for over 2 hours. It's on YouTube. I don't know if there's a quick way for you to find it. It used to be that I go to King On's website and all the videos were arranged chronologically or reverse chronologically. So the latest would be right there. But recently, every time I go there, I could not find it because it's somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I experienced.
Yeah.
It was there, and now I have time to find.
Yeah, I don't know if there are a better way to do. I used to go to video, and now I don't go to video. I go to the next one. I forgot what it's called. Anyway, you just try. You can find them. They were out there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. Bye.